Okay, everybody, it's 5 o'clock on the West Coast, the best coast. So we're going to go ahead and get started right now. Thank you all so much for being here. Someone is sharing their screen that shouldn't be, so I'm not sure what's going on with that. Nathaniel, please be careful about that kind of stuff. I'm going to go ahead and turn that
There
off.
we go. Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to change that right now. There we go. We won't have any more accidents on that note. Hi, everybody. I'm Jason from the Los Angeles Center of Photography. So welcome to our Thursday night presentation. So glad you all are here. Right off the bat, I just want to remind everybody that this is being recorded. In addition, what I'm going to ask everyone to do is make sure that your microphones are turned off. And if you feel comfortable that your videos are on, we do want to see your smiling faces. We always like to see everybody's smiling faces. And if this is your first time, welcome. And if you're returning to our Thursday night specials, then thanks for being here again. On that note, I do want to thank all of our members for being here. And if you're not a member, I encourage you to join. I'll be putting a link into the chat function down at the bottom of your screens in just a few minutes. Where you can join Los Angeles Center of Photography. We need all the help that we can get. And if you are a member, tell your friends and make sure that they're coming by as well. In addition, let's see what else I got in my notes over here. We will have a question and answer session at the end of our presentation tonight. But what I would like everybody to do is if you do have a question as you think about it, please do write that question down into the chat function at the bottom of your screen. That way you don't forget to ask and we don't forget to answer. And that way we make sure we get everybody's questions talked to and answered. Right, let's see. A little bit of noise going on over here. Make sure everybody's microphones are off. I'll take care of that in just a second. So without further ado, the only other thing that I want to talk to you about is we are now going to have a survey available for you at the end of our presentations. And sorry, we're just gonna, give me a second just to take care of all of this. Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay, there we go. No more interruptions. Anyways, we are going to have a survey available at the end of our presentation, and I'm going to put the link into the chat function here in just a few minutes, and then I will also put it in at the end of our presentation. It is really, really helpful for us at Los Angeles Center of Photography for you to fill that out. That way we can make sure that we continue to give you the best experiences possible through this new and exciting Zoom and virtual world that we are all sharing our information with each other. So please, please take literally just about 2 minutes to fill that survey out at the end of our presentation tonight. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Julia Dean. She's going to be hosting us tonight from Los Angeles Center of Photography. Julia, go ahead.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am delighted to have Ibarian X here as our moderator tonight and Brandon as our guest. Before we begin, let me say a few things about LACP. In case you don't know, we've been around now for more than 21 years. We started back then in a 900 square foot space on Venice Beach. Lisa McCord, who's here, she was there in the beginning. She knows the place well. Thank you, Lisa, for being such a longtime supporter. That's not part of my speech, I just inserted that. We moved in December, 21 years later, into a 6,900 square foot space, especially designed for us, thanks to a really successful year of fundraising. And then, as you well know, the pandemic hit and put us all at a scare, basically. Our dedicated staff, our unbelievable staff, turned everything overnight to online. And we have survived thanks to the PPP, a Getty grant, our friends who donate a lot of money, our staff who works like around the clock. We've made it, but we're not out from under it all. We keep adding more things to our calendar. we keep adding more online classes and more events and more events and more events. And I think, how do we have time for this? It's like, I mean, we work so many hours for so many years, and it seems like we're working even more to bring all this wonderful stuff for you, because we are determined to keep this place going. So we need all the help we can get, and only one little thing can help us. And that's to become a member if you aren't already. It's $95 a year for people who live in California and $45 for people who live out of state. It helps us so much, you have no idea. Once we make it through the pandemic, LACP will be doing so well between on-site and online. But we, like I say, still need to raise a lot of money. If you aren't already receiving our newsletters, just sign up, go onto our homepage and sign up, and you'll learn about everything that goes on here. The most important thing I need to tell you about right now is our online fundraiser, which is on October 24th. We've hired a fancy Hollywood production company to produce this for us. It's going to be quite special. We're honoring Douglas Kirkland and his wife, Francoise, for their long time career. We're honoring Esteban Oriol for his long-time LA career. We're honoring the LA Times photographers for their 2020 amazing work that they've done frontline during the coronavirus and the pandemic, the riots, the protests. We do a lot around here, and we just love sharing our place. And the only thing that's missing right now is you all under this roof. And so I can't wait until that time happens again. But in the meantime, we're just doing this Zoom platform, and I love seeing you all. It means so much to me. It makes my week, it makes my day, it makes, my staff meetings make my day, and my staff knows that. It's just seeing you all just is so good, and just keeping the photography and the love for photography going through this crazy time that we're all challenged with is what we are. So, all right, going on, let me introduce our special guest. I'll let Ibarria next introduce Brandon, but I want to introduce Ibarria next. It's such a pleasure to introduce Ibarria next Perello, photographer, writer, teacher, producer. I met him years ago, and when I did, I remember asking him to pronounce his name by syllables while I wrote it down on a napkin next to me. One time, later, after I'd practiced for a couple of years, I introduced him to a group as E-R-E-O Nex. And he said, "That's pretty good, Julia, just a little faster next time." This man in front of you is beloved, respected, and held in esteem amongst all who meet him. He loves to share what he knows, which is why he has written so many books and taught so many students. We are so pleased that Ibarria Nex not only shares his time with us as a teacher, but he is also on LACP's advisory board. He means so much to so many. If you don't know about his podcast, you must. Weekly, he interviews photographers. His most recent was 529 on the Candid Frame. We love having him as part of our LACP family. And before I hand it over to him to introduce Brandon, I forgot to introduce my staff. And I want to say, Kevin Weinstein, raise your hand. Janice McGavin, raise your hand. Jason Wolfuck, Brandon Gannon, is Sarah, and Sarah. These people help, well, they run LACP, and without them, we all wouldn't be here. I love them so much. And there's also, we have board members here as well. We have Lori, and I didn't see if anybody else was here from the board. Lori Ordover, anybody else? Did I miss anybody else? I keep getting tears in my eyes when I talk, sorry.
I'm
Eric,
here.
oh, hi, Eric. I didn't see you. I'm sorry. And Eric Joseph, our beloved Lori and Eric are here. And they're all, somebody's always at everything from the board. They're a wonderful board and a wonderful staff. So, Ibarria Nex, go for it. You can introduce Brandon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that introduction. That's very, very kind of you. And thank you for having me on board here tonight. when I found out that I was going to sit down and chat with Brandon, I was really excited because I had seen his work a while ago, and I really loved it. So when I found out that I was going to have the opportunity to hear him speak and talk about his work, I was especially thrilled. He's a his photographs come from a documentary style of photography, um, and it comes from a long tradition of people who have been really socially conscious in terms of the images that they create. And there are a lot of people that photograph in some of the locations, most famously the Mississippi Delta, where he's done a lot of work. And there are a lot of people who have photographed in those spaces, photographing very similar subjects, but there are very few, and I count Brandon amongst them, that really is able to capture the spirit and the humanity of the place in a very personal and unique way. And I think that's something that's been recognized by a lot of um, a lot of people who have hired him to work for him, which include NPR, Harper's, um, Mother Jones, Texas Monthly. He was acknowledged as one of the top 100 under 100 by the Oxford American organization. And as you'll see, his work is beautiful. There's no doubt that it's that, but it also possesses a wonderful humanity that I think that a lot of photographers, whether they practice documentary photography or not, really aspire to um, imbue their work with. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing his work tonight, hearing him speak. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brandon.
Wonderful. Thank you, Barian X. It's very kind of you. I really appreciate that. Thank you. That means a lot. Hi, gang. I'm Brandon. Thanks for joining in tonight. We got a packed house. This is awesome. I guess grab your popcorn and your ices and Diet Cokes, and we'll look at some photography and chat a bit. Feel free to ask questions if you want at any time. I guess the name of the game for me at the moment, I wanted to kind of take this opportunity to kind of give you a sense of where I started. I think for me, photography, let me start this way, and this might sum it up. I believe that we as photographers are among the torchbearers of one of mankind's most defining traits, and that's storytelling. So from the hand pigmented cave walls of Paleolithic man to using those same hands to operate complicated narratives on iPads. We tell stories, and I've always seen photography as the medium. I feel like maybe I would have been a writer or something else if the tides hadn't gone the way they did. But so photography to me has been that. It's not so much about making a perfect frame, it's about conveying an idea. And when I found myself in photography, I was telling the guys before we started today, I needed an elective in college. I had spent my high school years battling stage 4 lymphoma. And so 16, 17, 18, I had lymphoma. And then the summer after I graduated high school, I started doing my chemotherapy. And when that was wrapped, I kind of found myself lost and a bit confused. I knew I needed to do something, but I didn't anticipate ever having to do anything. So here it was, a new door is opened. And when I needed an elective that freshman year of college, my roommate at the time said, well, man, you ought to take a photography class. And I said, okay. He said, well, my uncle teaches it. I said, great. And it wasn't until about a year later or so, we'd take a field trip to the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, and somebody would run up to Keith Carter and say, I need your autograph. And we always thought, well, who is this guy? He's just our eccentric teacher playing mandolin and, teaching us f-stops. But that was the most serendipitous, introduction to photography. And I feel really blessed for that. I spent my years between, the darkroom of traditional photography with Keith, while spending the other half of my week interning, well, working part-time at a small local newspaper outside my hometown of Beaumont, Texas. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'd be in the newspaper, and Tuesday, Thursdays, I'd be in Keats class, you know, juggling both sides of the brain in a way. So a little bit of what I'll show you is how I progressed from, I guess, creating very, you know, traditional documentary reportage, you know, 35 millimeter work. And then later on, about 2009 or so, I began getting back into this groove of traditional black and white darkroom work using medium format. So let me share my screen with you, and I will stop talking and start showing. All right, I think we covered my name. Early works, makes it sound so important. So one of the very first things I did in school was I went and lived with some shrimpers in South Texas. I needed a story to tell for a class. And fortunate enough, this guy named Buddy Trabig invited me to come spend a week with him, working on his boat, waking up at 5:30 to go pay bills, fixing the engine, having beers, rescuing stranded boats out on the coast. And this was the first body of work where I put myself in someone else's home. You know, Buddy and I would come home from the shrimp boat at night. His wife would make us some hamburger helper, and he'd mix us up 2 big gulp glasses of Zima and boxed pink wine. And we'd watch the Sanford and Son in the recliner. And it was a real baptism, because he'd do all that in his tidy whities. And, you know, I just met the guy. So that was my introduction of, you know, diving into someone else's life. And, you know, right about the time I was getting ready to graduate high school or college, I had interned at the Dallas Morning newspaper. And a buddy of mine, you know, while I was up freelancing after my internship was over, one night said, "What are you working on?" I said, "Well, I'm just fielding assignments. I mean, I'm just, you know, trying to make some dough." And he said, "Well, that's, you know, that's great, but that's not what is important. You know, personal work is where you begin to really, you know, flap your wings. It shows your interest. It tells people what you're into. It allows you to express yourself in a very personal way that sometimes assignment work doesn't, you know." So I found, by doing a little research in between classes at my university, the University of North Texas, the story about a vanishing native island in northwestern Alaska. And the village was called Shishmaref. So there's about 500 people living on a half-mile wide by 3-mile long barrier island that was eroding into the sea. And I called them up one day after class. I said, "Is this happening?" And she's like, "Yeah, we've got people roaming the shore watching for, you know, houses to fall off." And I said, "Well, all right, I'm coming." And I worked my tail off a bit. I did the absolute worst thing you could possibly do, and got I won't name the airline, but an airline's business card with a terrible APR, and sunk myself. But I had a hell of an adventure, and lived with people for 2 months, you know, trying to tell the story. I went in summertime and then wintertime. And this, if Buddy the Shrimper was the first time to dive in to try to, you know, to translate an existence, this was jumping, you know, into the frying pan. And I felt so fortunate that, I mean, like an image like this, where this family, the Weawanas, had, after a couple weeks, really taken to me, and invited me to begin staying with them, and offered me to go off inland with them on a camping expedition to go pick berries for a couple days. And that alone just spoke worlds to the trust, I believe, because you've got me, the stranger from Texas with a drawl, sleeping in a tent 2 foot from, you know, your nieces and nephews and daughters, and here we are in the middle of nowhere, you know, and we don't know each other from Adam. So that was my real taste of being, you know, granted this extraordinary hospitality to a stranger, you know, or from a stranger. So I spent 2 months doing this, what I thought was going to be the big National Geographic project, you know, very, very traditional documentary work. And after that, I graduated college. And most of my years in college were split between the photojournalism classes, and I nearly graduated with a double major in international development, predominantly looking at Latin American economics. So with that, I believe that, you know, what I wanted was in education was some tangible education, something that I could actually apply to my career. I didn't want to just be a daily assignment photographer. I wanted to study ideas and really inform the work that I was making, you know. And so I began working in northern Mexico in an ejido called Ejido Hermosillo, just south of Arizona, an unincorporated village. And me, and along with a buddy of mine and his girlfriend who grew up there, began working with children, teaching photography, and then we would set up exhibitions for the children's work in San Francisco to pay to build a community center so that they could have a place to do their art. So these first couple images are just some, like, I just grabbed a really tight edit of stuff to give you a sense of what I was doing there. But what I've done with this over years, and if you go to my website, you'll be able to see a much broader edit. But over time, being in Texas, I would have assignments for the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or Open Society Foundations, looking at immigration issues. And so I began to take these sort of and create 3 chapters in a way of the early work of being in country, the tumultuous road, you know, crossing the border and finding yourself in the harsh desert environments of South Texas, where by 2011, 12, 13, during the heat wave, you would find a growing number, a grossly growing number of migrant deaths due to the inhospitable terrain. So publications like the Wall Street Journal would hire me to do work like this, you know. Again, very traditional documentary work. The New York Times later on would have me photographing what I would call sort of like the entrance into a land of anonymity. You know, it's one thing to get here into this place that you so desire and to reunite with your family, and you leave everything that you've ever known, you know, behind to come to this place that promises something, only to realize that you can't raise your hand. You know, you could just as well be pulled over and incarcerated for a broken taillight as you would anything else. So there was a growing fear in the suburbs of Dallas about tactics that the local city governments were using to work hand in hand with immigration officials for acts like that. If a broken taillight, or you accidentally ran a stop sign, or for you know, did something to catch the law's eye. So we would go to community meetings to try to educate women of the community about their civil rights, most not realizing that even though they're not citizens, they still, you know, are underneath that umbrella. So these kinds of stories are what was, you know, being created in Texas itself. Which I felt like this was a really appropriate one to end on. Just this idea that so much is hidden behind the fence. If you want to see the real edit, I encourage you to go to my site. And there's a lot of text that I put on my site to tell some of these stories. And, so that brings me to, I guess, the modern day of what I've been doing for the past, this is 2020, so the past 11 years now. In the summer of 2009, I began riding my bicycle. I found myself riding my bicycle through the Mississippi Delta, the northern Mississippi Delta. And like most people, I think at that time I had a novice's understanding of the Delta. You know, I understood the historical perspective of the civil rights atrocities. You know, everybody knows about the history of blues music and that heritage and the agricultural region as a whole. But I set forth basically visiting these villages that dot the landscape. And I would initially just find a town You know, like that was quirky named like Alligator or Bobo or Duncan. But one of the communities was one of the United States' oldest completely African-American communities called Mound Bayou, which was founded in 1887 by a band of freedmen and women who came from the Jefferson Davis family plantation. They came from his older brother's plantation just south of Vicksburg. But so I've got a series of anecdotes that I like to tell in showing this work. Somewhere in the middle of the first year or two, you know, I would stay up late doing research and listening to sermons and such. And I found a sermon that Martin Luther King had given in November 1967. It was, in which he spoke about civil disobedience. And he used the biblical story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as an early example, one of the earliest examples of civil disobedience. And with that, you know, the story has it that the three men, in refusing to bow to King Nebuchadnezzar's golden idol, were cast into the fiery furnace. And once in there, the king's men peered through the flames and saw not three, but a fourth entity standing amongst them, presumably being their Lord, shepherding them from the flames. And with that, Dr. King said that somewhere along the way, you should discover something that is so dear, so precious to you, something that is so eternally worthful that you could never give it up. You ought to discover some principle. You ought to have some great faith that grips you so much that you could never give it up. Somehow you must go on and say, I know that the Lord that I worship is able to deliver me. But if not, the title of the sermon, I'm going on anyhow. I'm going to stand up for it anyway. So what does that mean? You know, to me, what he's talking about are two common themes: faith and perseverance. You know, striving for something that you believe full-heartedly in, sacrificing yourself. And what he says is not an if faith, but a though faith, meaning that you don't do something because you say, I'm going to do this if I'm insured to get this. You do something because though you won't get anything out of it, it's the right thing to do. And so with that, I began reflecting on my experiences along the Delta. And I would see these stories, these themes reside in the ordinary lives of men and women, men working on farms that they do not own, mothers taking care of their children. I would hear it echoed in the sermons and in the songs that we would sing in church, which, by the way, is where this body of works title derived. Originally, it was entitled "When Morning Comes," which is a sermon. I mean, a hymn where it was, by and by, when the morning comes, when the saints of God are gathering home, we will tell the story of how we've overcome, and we will understand it better by and by. When we began to publish the book, we changed the title into In That Land of Perfect Day. And that comes from a stanza: we are often tossed and driven on the restless sea of time. Somber skies and howled tempests oft succeed a bright sunshine. In that land of perfect day, when the mists have rolled away, we will understand it better by and by. And I'll show you, let me, before I get carried away, I'll move on. But this is my friend Choo with his Bible. Many times people would bring an item with them for a portrait. I have a story about him later. These are the founders of Mound Bayou. Well, the top man, Isaiah T. Montgomery. This was taken in their city hall. I found a New York Times article from 1910 in which the headline declared, "Ex-slave's dream of model Negro community comes true where no white man can own a square foot of property." In the subtext of that story, they quote Isaiah T. Montgomery. And to back up just a little bit, Isaiah and his father, Isaiah was born on the Joseph Davis plantation, the very heart of the Confederacy, essentially, at the time. And he was raised as Joseph Davis's, right-hand man in a way. The story had it that, you know, like, he stayed close to Joseph. He slept in that room with he and his wife. He would run dispatches. His father, Ben, managed the commissary on the store. And ultimately, when the Confederacy fell, Isaiah and his father were able to purchase the Davis plantation for a loan of $300,000. And they turned it into the third largest cotton plantation in the state of Mississippi, all Black owned and operated. And for a multitude of reasons, this endeavor faltered. They had a pestilence, a flood, cotton prices had fallen post-war, and his father had passed away. And his father, being, you know, the ringleader of the newly freed men and women, they lost their leadership. So they defaulted on the loan, and the lands went back to Jefferson Davis. If you flash forward 10 years later, you will find that Isaiah and his cousin Benjamin, who was, it was too wide of a shot, his portrait, his hand-painted portraits, his portrait would be one over from the man with the bow tie. But they began putting ads in the local newspapers in Natchez and in Vicksburg, looking for the diaspora, all the like-minded men and women that had come from the original plantation to come and settle in new land. And in that's where Mound Bayou was, in these unclaimed regions of virgin forests of the Mississippi Delta. The railroad was coming through, so there were plots being sold. So Isaiah and his band of men took off into these virgin forests. And the subtext of the New York Times interview said that Isaiah stands looking out at his men begin to grow weary at this arduous task. And he says, "Why stagger at the difficulties set before you? Have you not for centuries braved the miasma and hewn down forests at the command of your masters? Can you not this day perform the same heroic duty for yourselves and your children unto successive generations, that they might learn to live and worship beneath their own vine and fig tree?" So these words took the dreams of enslaved generations and turned them into realities filled with Black bankers, doctors, and lawyers in Mound Bayou by 1910. So these are the stories that I was thinking of as I was in the Delta for these past 11 years. Let me see how I want to continue with that. I mean, so the images that I'll show you are basically an accumulation of images taken from these 5 scattered villages and everything in between, like the birds in field here. This was a pretty typical pastoral scene in the Delta at winter time. The birds coming and harvesting the fallen seeds from the harvest. I have one family that took me in, and that was the Coffee family in Duncan, Mississippi. It was a family of a lot of boys, big guys, and they were like big brothers, and showed me around, would introduce me to their friends, and their cousins would come by on a Friday evening. We'd drink beers, and they'd say, "Why don't you come by my house tomorrow?" I'd meet their friends and their cousins, and so on until there were, you know, I'd amassed a number of townships and communities to come to and have fellowship. Damien here that you see, this is Dang Dang. He and I, on like a dreary, sleepy, hungover Christmas Eve, he was doing his daughter's hair, and his hair kept getting in his eyes. So he put his hair up, and when he got wrapped up, we were sitting there just pedaling about. He said, "Didn't you want a picture of my tattoo?" I said, "Oh yeah, let's get it." So he takes off his shirt, and his hair's still up. And this was the last frame of the last roll of the last trip for before I had to go back home for Christmas. But on his back is Mississippi 662, which is the area code for the region. And I said, I asked him this not too long ago. I said, "Damien, a lot of people ask, like, how as an African-American man do you feel that you would want to put, you know, Mississippi in this identifying number on yourself?" And he said, "This is home. This is my family. This is pride. This is everything to me." Right? It's not about a place. It's not about history. It's about the here and the now and the people I love. So I find that really powerful. A lot of times I would meet folks going to church. I would stay in Mound Bayou with Reverend Hall. He took me in and would introduce me to his congregations. The image on the left is from the 122nd anniversary Christmas service. And the image on the right is a pretty typical scene of a little stoic church in the night. And a lesson learned, if you ever see a photograph, just take it. Don't give yourself an excuse to wheel away and come back another day. I photographed this church image in 2011 in July, and I almost didn't do it. Thought, well, this is going to be a bunch of junk. It's at night. And about a month and a half later, a tornado had come through, and I was passing back down that country road and realized that the little cross had gotten blown away into the wind. And it was just, for me, the little cross makes the whole photograph. But yeah, lesson learned, do it now or don't ever do it. This body of work, particularly because I made this big transition shooting square format, was revolutionary to me in terms of being able to play with images and compose them and make triptychs and diptychs, and really try to get a new type of narrative together, a less linear narrative. So compiling images like this, like a decapitated snake with the Christmas angel from First Baptist in Mount Bayou, for me, these ideas of these like religious overtones of faith and the conquering of temptation or Satan, the serpent, all of those things. These are the things that, sort of inanimate objects suddenly come to life. And there's something that resides more powerful between the two images than individually on their own. So this was one of my favorite images of President Barack Obama. This was in 2011. I had gone to photograph Brother Preston Holmes, who at the time was the oldest resident in Mount Bayou. He was the first Black postmaster. And we'd set up this whole interview. We were going to do this very legitimate photojournalism thing. I recorded his conversations. We were going to do a very formal portrait in his parlor. And we made some nice portraits, but when I turned around to get another roll of film, I saw this little altar, this little tribute to the president. And, it just struck me that that was the first time in my entire life, I'm 39 now, that I'd ever seen someone acknowledge or revere a political person in their home. A lot of times they go in the trash can, but here they find their place exalted, and the comfort of the loving home. So that image is like, it's a quiet image, but it speaks so much to me about the time that we were in. And the body of work began just as President Obama had taken office in June, July of 09. And then it wrapped up, and the book went to press right as Trump took office. So this body of work basically covers the delta between, for both administrations. I would go to work with folks. This is what a traditional, a typical annual burn looks like in the late summer. And then with Turbo, that's in Mount Bayou. He's a farm hand working the field. And this is the day the snowball guy came to town. I swear I did not tell him to hold his pickle like that. He just did it. And to this day, it blows my mind. But this was at the coffee home. Most of the time, these images of the children or of these items, like the boys we would run through the woods wild in the summer, and the boys would bring me things like a wounded bird or a dead snake. And that's where a lot of these artifacts and such would come from. So the majority of all this portraiture and found items, most all of it is in a collaborative manner in that way. I would, in order to meet people, if I went to a little place I had never been before, I would carry 3x3-inch square prints in my pocket. So, if I'm at this bar, sitting in the dark on a Friday night and I don't know anybody, someone would come up and say, hey, what are you doing here? And I pull out the pictures and they'd say, yeah, that's my cousin. He's got that picture in his bedroom, or, that's my uncle. And suddenly we had a kinship. And so that's how a lot of these relationships would go beyond my introductions to the Coffey family. I had this long lost dream of doing, like a 4-image series of these fields, like the winter field here with the burn and the birds that I first showed you. And what I forgot to do was make my horizon line the exact same on each one of them. And they really hacked me off, so I never show them like that. But This is James Watson Jr. Bundling wood on a cold evening outside the coffee home. James was one of the first men I met. I realized I didn't put this other image in this edit, but there's a photograph of James shirtless, sweaty, dancing like a top on the hot pavement of this bar in Alligator, Mississippi. And he and I had some conversation then, and he invited me ultimately to go to his home the day after Sunday service. And lo and behold, the home he invited me to was the Coffee family. So that's how this whole thing began. And I like to say that I found the key to the most tender part of the Delta in the pocket of the wildest man in town. That was him before a beer. If he had a beer, he'd be Dance Machine was his nickname. I wish I had put this picture in there, but anyway, for another time. This is Father's Day. I know I'm probably running fast or slow, so I'll speed up. But this is Father's Day a couple years ago, and Chucky's got his hands full. Again, just like playing with images, this was Mama's New Braids in 2010, and Christmas tree in front of my buddy Nutt's house, and then what I call cat nap on Christmas Eve in 2012. Just a sleepy little Christmas scene. And this is Alex. He was married into the Coffee family with he and his lady Tiffany's baby, a Miracle, A' Miracle. It's the most beautiful name, with a little owl looking over them. And I'll end this edit with this one. This is how I ended the book, and it's the dandelion. It's something we've all done as children, and to me, it's an idea that the things we do in life, those seeds are sown by the breath, by the wind within our lungs. It's through our own efforts that we plant. And anyway, so that's the gist of the sort of 2005 of me and to 2000 now. So that's what the book looks like. Yeah. Now, Barnex, I've got other things I could show to keep a dialogue going that spawned from all that work, where I can shut it down. We take questions or have a conversation.
Yeah, let's have a conversation, and feel free to show, more work as we talk.
Great.
I really was fascinated by your reference to that quote by MLK, and about finding the reason why you do what you do. Because I think that a lot of photographs that I sometimes see a lot of people make, especially in this part of the country, are made for photographic sake.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh, it would be really interesting subject matter, it'll make really good photographs. And it seems like you're driven by a much greater purpose than that. And I'd like you to talk a little more about that, specifically from the filter of what is it about you and who you are makes you the perfect person to tell these particular stories in these particular ways?
Gosh, it's a really tough one. Because, I know who I am, and you see who I am on the outside, and that's not something that is, being a white photographer and in Black communities and communities of color, that is never lost on you at all. It's not something trivial, and you're conscious of that. There's a weight to that responsibility as being a bearer of someone else's, someone's representation, and bridging that divide, whatever it may be. And I like to think that, you can only get to know someone as much as they're allowing you to get to know them, and could I ever fully comprehend another person's existence shy of climbing into their dreams at night and walking through their daylight experiences? No. But I can ask questions. I can educate myself. I can be open and transparent and try to understand, you know. And for me as a white photographer in communities such as this, you know, I've felt that that is my role, to try to understand. And there was a copy of Aperture's issue of Vision and Justice that came out a couple years ago. It spoke about, it focused on the portrayal of Black American photography. And the guest curator, Sarah Lewis, had a quote that said that art is often the way to cross the gulf that separates us. How we remain connected depends on the function of pictures, increasingly the way that we process worlds unlike our own, right? And for me, you know, that's what photography has been, whether that was in Alaska or, you know, in Latino communities or here. It was a bridge, it was a medium, it was a platform, it was, an understanding. Yeah, but I guess the only thing I could say that makes me the perfect person, which I'm not, was that I was allowed to be, you know, I was allowed to be. And that took trust and communication and, you know, a willingness to listen more and say less.
You know, one of the linchpins of all the work that you showed was struggle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether it was, you know, the fishermen, whether it was the immigrants, whether it's the people living in the Delta.
Mm-hmm.
It's the struggles that all of these people face.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be an elusive thing to try and convey in a photograph, because that is an integral part of their story. How did you find that you could tackle that without falling into cliche?
Because I wanted to try to do the opposite. I think anyone, anyone that hears Mississippi Delta thinks a certain thing. They think cotton fields and impoverishment. Those things are understood. They're believed. They're assumptions. And what I wanted to just show was the humanity of it all, and celebrate the folks living there today, that they're in love. You know, they're families, they're men going to work, they're women with newborns, they're women watching their children get taller and older and sassier. It's, you know, it wasn't about the geopolitical this or that, you know, it was about people being people, you know. And I think looking in between those threads at, you know, the fabric of life, and showing that, you know, I think through all of these, one thing that struck me is there are commonalities. To me, it's almost the opposite. There's this celebratory nature. Oh yeah, thanks for doing the stop share. I think there's this, you know, it's the celebratory nature of the celebration of life within these communities, the people being people, you know, that transcends the struggle that's inherent, you know, that one might first see if they were to open their eyes.
Talk to me about the choice to render these in black and white in a square format rather than, traditional 35 millimeter format in color.
Sure. I shoot with I guess for this particular body of work, it was the fact that I had some black and white film that I'd had, and I thought, well, I'll just go shoot some black and white film with this. I didn't have much intent at the beginning, but this was a transition for me because I had never shot, you know, waist level, let alone square format, and you know, it really changed the way I saw. It changed my speed and the cadence, the rhythm of my operation. And it was the perfect tool, you know, for the timeline of the region. I mean, it's very slow. You're not in a hurry. You'd be in a hurry to do a lot of nothing if you're in a hurry. And so, there's something slow and methodical about that I gravitated toward. And, I think traditionally with photojournalism work, specifically with the advent of 35 millimeter digital, I find it myself, you're just firing away, there's not,
Yeah.
you could say, oh, it's my subconscious. I'm just, I've got it, it's inherent. But I find that when I'm on assignment, I'm not necessarily keeping count of how many frames I've got left on my card. You know what I mean? And there's a preciousness to that. And I think there's also a preciousness in the byproduct of that, of making the prints themselves that are cherished, like everyone in these photographs gets photographs, at home. And like that next batch of work I can show is basically all the photographs that they exhibit in their home space. And that's something that's really been touching to me. But yeah, sorry, I rambled.
No, I love rambling. Feel free. When you're on assignment, you have an agenda in terms of what kind of images you have to deliver to your client, largely editorial.
Yeah.
But when you're working on a project like this, you're only having to answer for yourself.
Sure.
And as you said, this is very sort of slow process. So talk to me about when you choose to make a photograph and when when you choose not to make a photograph, and how that changes as you're working on a project for as long as you have.
I think, like it's beginning any project, I didn't know, I didn't know, that I would come back with anything on the very first visit there. I mean, I could have easily had 23 rolls of film worth of nothing, and, when I had this sort of foundational, like the majority, I'd say surprisingly, a third of the book was made in the very first week I was ever there. It's uncanny, but there were images that stayed true throughout the entire process, up to the 8th year of editing. And, and with that, I think with working on anything, you change your interpretation of the place changes, your relationship with the people change over time. You learn new things about communities or some distant place that you never had the time to go to. And those things just sort of fit together. I will tell you that when, the photojournalism, part of me, when I heard about the story of Mound Bayou, I thought, aha, that's such an interesting, unique story. That's the story. And the fact was, that was the end of the first year being there. I thought, that's the story. I've just got to focus on that. But in doing so, I was ignoring all of these wonderful things that were happening on the periphery because they didn't fit within this paradigm that I was trying to construct, right? And when I relinquished that hold upon myself creatively and said, just let it be whatever it'll be, we'll make sense of it later, then the things just started coming into play. It wasn't any longer me going home thinking, oh, what am I doing? I can't do this anymore, to like being joyful about every experience. And, the main thing was I came there not particularly with the idea of making the next big project. It was me being there as a person, as someone that wanted to go to church after a hard time in my life. And it was just really fortunate that the people I met had a lot to say. I wanted to listen, and they allowed me into their lives. But so I think the project over time evolved into something greater than I ever anticipated. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, because I was reading.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think just in terms of deciding on an individual level of when to take a photograph and when to not, I mean, that's up in the air, it's whenever it catches you, it catches you. I would set out later on and know that now once I had a decent foundation of image making going on, I knew that there were certain themes that I wanted to keep an eye out for. And I would try to find those. And sometimes the harder I tried, the further away they'd get. But yeah.
I read that the time when you began the project was a time when you had a breakup in a relationship.
Yeah.
And whenever you go through an end of a relationship, it leaves you incredibly vulnerable, regardless of whether you're the one who ended it or not. And do you think the vulnerability that you felt at that particular time was opened up possibilities that you might not have otherwise experienced or taken advantage of or leveraged at this particular moment?
I think there was you could say that. I mean, the very first weekend I was there, I'd been wheeling my bike around Alligator, and I'll speed this story up, but I'd met some boys in a swimming pool at the front of the town, and they said, "Man, are you here for the parking lot party?" I said, "Oh yeah, I'm here for that. That's awesome." He said, "I go, what time does it start?" They said, 5 o'clock. So I wheeled around town to burn some time, and I found this little church. It was a Traveler Rest Missionary Baptist Church, and I noted the time that the service would start up the next morning, and I got dressed for Sunday service, somewhat disheveled from the parking lot party, and it happened to be Father's Day, and that had a particularly impactful impact on me at that time. And the Reverend asked me, there was only about a dozen of us in the church. There were me, his 12-year-old son that was a deacon, and he himself was a traveling preacher. So it's every other weekend that they do service. And then about 6 or 7 ladies and a baby. And when they asked me to come join the prayer circle with them, actually, I'd had a recorder in the pew there, and so I recorded this whole service, and that's where the title of the book came from. This was the song that we sang that day. But he asked the choir to come up and play, and the 3 ladies go up. They play the piano, and 2 of them sing, and we encircle this infant, and the deacon raises the little boy up in his arms high above us, and it was earth shattering. It was like our prayers reverberated the shingles and flew out into the yonder. And it was one of those moments where for the message I needed to hear that day, I thought, like, this is where I need to be. This is where I need to be. And every conversation, no matter old or young, faith would come into it at some point, and that's what I was yearning for, like most people.
Well, why don't we show some more work, and then maybe we can talk about a couple of images?
Yeah. Let me try to share this screen again. So, this is stuff I really haven't ever shown the public. You remember the man Choo Choo? This is him. He was holding his Bible right here. Last year, I got a call saying that Choo Choo had passed away. Choo Choo was like a pure joy. The reason why we have this photograph was that he would collect old books, and every time I would come over to our buddy Nutt's house where he lived, he would take me to this little shed with this weathered trunk, and he would lift up the tattered lid and show me a new book he had acquired. It might have been like an encyclopedia from 1988, or the history of African Americans in World War I, which I have on the bookshelf at home. But on this particular day, he brought forth this large gold leaf Bible, his most prized possession, and we set up the portrait in front of the laundry that just got put out a few minutes prior. But Jeremy, his son, I spoke to him on the phone, and I'd never met Jeremy. He lived in Memphis. He still does. Told me that his father had died, and I scoured all my negatives looking for all the images of his father, and made big prints and little prints, and they ended up using them in the funeral brochure, and then in the newspaper, and put a big frame version of this one up. And for me, this was like, I've said this a bunch of times, but it was the most, important contribution to photography in my experience for me, that I might ever have. This idea of offering this, like, or contributing to the lasting memory of a father to a son, and I think that's the type of photography that I'm doing. Like, it's these images aren't set out to be a documented pieces to tell this tale. These are byproducts of the relationships built and evidence of lives. So the pictures that I'll show you now are all of the images where people would hear I'm in town and they'd say, hey, my aunt came down from Chicago. She's in for the weekend. Will you come take her picture? Or, hey, we're all together Saturday. We're going to do a barbecue. Will you come by? Or, hey, we just had a new baby. And so, and the beauty of it is, having done this for so long, a miracle, who you saw Alex holding her up with the little Al, this was her as an infant, and this was her 3 years ago with Sass, and she could beat me up if she wanted. You know what I mean? And there's something beautiful about that. There's something so special.
Tell me about what you think about when you decide to make a portrait, because I see that in many of the images you're incorporating the environment around them,
Mm-hmm.
and that seems to be a key consideration when you're making the images, as well as how you're engaged with your subjects. Tell us a little more about what you're thinking about when you make these images.
The main thing I'm thinking about is trying to keep it clean, but I think in most cases, the environment, I tell the students that I have that, not to overlook the environment around the subject, that in most cases, the environment is just as powerful a character as the people you're looking at or the item you're photographing. So I never try to cast that off. And particularly in this case, I think the environment is very much a part of their lives, the reliance of these communities upon the agricultural system, be it what it may. And so, yeah, you can't extract one from the other, but I don't know if that answers your question. But.
How have the communities changed as you've returned there over and over again?
A lot of it stays the same. In my own personal case, the Coffeys have slowly trickled away to join their brothers and their aunties in Florida and Jacksonville. So one by one over the past couple years, a small, like one brother might go, one aunt and uncle might go, and kids go, until now the house is down to one brother and another one across the street. So it's actually a pretty sad, like end of an era type now. And now we have to go to Florida to see each other. But yeah, so there's a big shift in that sense. And of course, the other folks that they're related to, the distant relatives, are still all in the Delta. But that's the thing about the Delta. It doesn't change, There are organizations that are working to change, societal changes, economic changes. And that's one thing that's always been important for me, to emphasize, is that it's something that that I've struggled with and try to understand, that this body of work was coming from the international development background. Like, this body of work isn't going to bring more jobs to the region. It's not going to diversify the economy. It's what it can do is create a dialogue. I think it can introduce people to an idea, a way of life. It can share a story that might empower others. But in the real world application sort of way, not much has changed. Small mom and pop shops spring up, and some hipsters from Chicago might come down with Teach for America, but a large part of it stays exactly the way it is. Yeah. Does that
Some more
answer a little bit? Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
a lot of times lovers will say, "Hey, take our picture. We just got hooked up." people will call and say, hey, my grandkids are in, or take a picture of my son. So we'd do these very formal, meet me in the downtown. This is Reverend Hall, who I mentioned I would stay with in Mountain Bayou playing chess. He'd beat my tail every damn time. Couldn't beat him. 10 years, I think I've won one game, and he let me win, I think. This was a young man at his church one Sunday. Birthday parties, you know, and that's sort of the beauty of it. We've, you know, through all this time, we've shared birthdays and holidays and every regular old day in between, you know, just the common day of taking the girls. This is a Miracle and Mama, and wake up early and take them to school, make sure they got a tardy slip, and just normal life. That's what I do.
How do you think this working on this particular project has impacted the other work that you do?
Yeah, it's made me, it's made me long for, in terms of my work, my quote unquote work world, it makes me long for stories or commissions that allow me to really grow and understand someone over time. It's very rare that you get, you know, several months to work on one thing. I guess it is if you're at the top rung, it might be more common, but it makes me long for something that I could really, you know, get to learn and grow with someone that's in the photographs. The Wall Street Journal, there's a piece that I clipped into the back of this presentation, was one of the first examples of being able to do that with the film camera. But yeah, so these were images that I've given out that I've never done anything with. I started digging through them in the past couple months. And I love them. I almost love them more than, in a lot of ways, I love them more than the book. There's something different. Fathers with their boys and grandsons. Uncle holding two boys. A buddy holding Chi-Chi. Two boys carrying dogs. Carrying a snapping turtle. That's my buddy Nut. Nut holding the turtle. And, you know, just sweet little moments when we were picking pecans not too long ago during wintertime. I guess that was long ago. That was 2011. But, and then that's my buddy Herman and his wife, Nee. She's the sister of my godbrother Link in the plaid shirt holding the pecan bag. And, you know, things like this, just, hey, come take a picture real fast.
Can you tell me a little about the interaction with the white community that's there? Is that something that you were able to observe?
It's seldom. It's, I mean, it's by necessity. If you go into the store or, you know, or you go, or if you work on a farm, if you're a farmhand, I always felt some weird, I don't know why, I just, I never really, it wasn't I felt weird, but I just never interacted much with, you know, the white community, and like in terms of going over to the farmers and saying, how is it being a farmer? I was interested in the black farmer. A lot of these farms are massive incorporated farms, you know, fast holdings, and that's how this whole thing is shifted over time in that region. So, I mean, I think you will find, I wish I'd put this in there, but you will find these, you know, these glaring moments of you know, what we're dealing with now of racism, and where a stop sign, somebody in multiple stop signs I've seen over time. A buddy Nut drove me past one when I first saw it. Someone had taken a stencil with the name Obama and put it under the stop sign, you know, and that's something a man's got to go to work and see every day. He goes and works in some other guy's field, you know, and that's a pisser, you know. It's just, it's incomprehensible. But so there's things like that, but then there's, you know, the total opposite, where people grew up together. You got white buddies with your black buddies that you went to high school and played football with, and you grown up together and you live 3 blocks away from one another. So it's, you know, it's complicated. It's complicated, and it can get very, you know, it's easy to simplify things down to one or the other, but
Yeah.
it's complicated.
Well, tell me about the process of putting together the book. At one point, did you realize that you wanted to put it together in that form?
The book, I think, was a vehicle of control in a way. I felt a responsibility in the representation, of managing the story, of making sure that things can't be extracted and misconstrued. And the book was a way in which I could say what I needed to say, what needed to be said, and it couldn't be disjointed. You know, it was like a capsule. It just felt like, especially I guess now with you guys, you know, probably yawning with how much I'm talking, it was the appropriate way to convey the story, shy of being in person and saying it myself, you know. Yeah, it just went hand in hand.
What did you rediscover about the work as a result of putting together the book?
A lot of things I just never saw, you know, like that portrait of Choo Choo in front of the laundry. We thought that was a fine image, but I never, like, if there was an exhibition opportunity, that image was not like one of the images I was putting up to be in the exhibition until someone pointed it out. I totally overlooked it, and things like that. And then, you know, now that I'm going back 10, 11 years later and seeing that, you know, like the children, so a lot of the coffee children are all on Instagram. And, you know, one of them the other day, I hadn't seen him in years. He's a little, well, I didn't have it in the edit. He's in the book, he's a little boy with a bird. His name's Bud. And he reached out of the blue, like last week, and tagged that photograph and was like, I'm older now. And he's like, I go to his Instagram feed and he's a little dude. He's got his buddies and he's wearing camo, like he's going hunting. And I mean, it's like grown up, you know? And that's sort of the magic of it is like right before I met the Coffees, Mr. Van, the patriarch of the family, their family home had burned down a couple years prior. And the only thing he said he was able to save were his guns and some coins. And what I just said there did not include a family album of any sort. So that's sort of been the special thing, is going through and rescanning a bunch of old negatives and making these composites and grabbing as much stuff as I could. Is that it's a family album, you know, and it's not meant to be an exhibition or some big to do. It's a family album for a family, you know.
Well, I really feel that when I take a look at those photographs. Well, we have some questions that we ask each person here.
Yeah, please.
So I'm going to throw these at you.
Sure.
So first off, what is your favorite word?
Oh, yeah, my favorite word. I think, gosh, if you don't mind, I wrote these down earlier.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, it was, I felt like I was mortified that I'd forget them all. I put empathy. I think it's something a lot of us really have to work to obtain. Its absence can be so destructive. You know, marriages fail for lack of it. Wars are raised, unrest, persecution, and pain. Like, take, for instance, the world we're living in now, you know, the lengths we're having to go in this country and the world to simply achieve change. I think empathy, you know, there's two things. I think the two most important tools we have in fighting the predicament we're in are knowledge and empathy, you know, and in those two things, when combined, create understanding, you know. And so for me, that's what a foundation is built upon. I like that word.
Yeah, I like that one too. What's your favorite drink?
I forgot there was a quote I found to go along with that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Cornel West had a quote that I found years ago. He said, empathy is not simply a matter of trying to imagine what others are going through, but having the courage to do something about it. In a way, empathy is predicated upon hope. I like that too. My
So
favorite.
your favorite drink.
Oh man, if you and I were having a convo at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time 5 years ago, I would have said a strong gin and tonic. I think now it is I make homemade lemonade like once a day. I just squeeze my lemons and I put 2 tablespoons of sugar.
Oh man, once you do that, you can't go back to the other stuff.
I know. You get to an age where like the pain you have that morning is not worth the fun you have. Just can't bear it.
What part of the world would you like to visit that you haven't yet?
I put Japan or Asia, anywhere really. I think because their language is so unlike ours, that it's a mystery to me that I could walk down the street and need to go to the bathroom. I might end up at the library or something just by looking at the signs. I have no idea. But, I think Asia, considering it's on the absolute furthest point of the world for me, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I went to Tokyo for the first time last year, and it was really a transformative experience.
I bet so.
Yeah,
That's my only connection to that is watching Lost in Translation like 6 times.
All right.
Drinking
What profession?
Drinking GMTs and not being able to go to bed and falling asleep to Lost in Translation.
So what profession other than photography would you have enjoyed?
A doctor. I think obviously that's what I thought I was going to do when I was 5, I had a blood disorder, and that led to, we didn't know it at the time, but 10 years later, that was a precursor to me having an immune disorder. And that immune disorder at age 16 is what turned into my cancer. So I basically spent from 2 years old, 5 years old when I had my spleen removed to 19 when I finished my chemo, almost like a preliminary medical degree, or at least a damn good bedside manner. And for me, I think the medical field would be one of those things where you could see the outcome of your action immediately, And I think that's a wonderful thing.
And the last one is, tell us something about you that we wouldn't possibly know.
I like to bake pies. And my favorite one is to make a pear ginger pie. And
pear ginger pie?
Yeah, pear ginger. I make my own crust, put it in the oven. It's good. It's really good.
I'm gonna have to give you my address.
I'll do it. I'll send it. And I like bring down the house with try a little tenderness and sexual healing. Those are like, that's people used to give me dollar bills with my GMT in my hand. Just loved it.
Nice.
Those are 2 things.
Well, Brandon, it was a pleasure talking with you, man. Thank you.
Wyatt. Yeah, you as well. Thank you. And I'll see you tomorrow for the
Yeah. So I guess if we have any questions here so far, let me take a quick look here. And if people have any other questions, feel free to put it in the chat. One question was already asked about, why black and white other than color, but there's a question about your photographic influences, who they would be.
I think traditionally, I guess I could just start with obviously I studied with Keith Carter, and so that was one side of my brain, and the other I had my professor at UNT at the University of North Texas was a staff photographer at the Dallas Morning News named Mona Reeder, Reeder, who was just a powerhouse of a woman. And those two were like my photography parents, hardcore, bad to the bone lady that shoot conflict and everything else. And Wayne Miller is a big one for me, particularly being a white man that photographed in South Chicago, and seemed to capture it right. Mm-hmm. Wayne Miller and August Sander. I think his portraits were just out of sight, just unbelievable. There's my favorite one is the chef with a big bowl, and his body is about as round as that bowl.
Oh yeah, that's a great shot.
I saw that in real life once at the tape, and it just blew me away.
What cameras do you use?
I use a Mamiya C330. I don't have it in here. And so that's a waist level viewfinder, shoot Triax 400. And then my tools in my trade for work are a shoot Nikon.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us about the class that you're teaching through LACP.
So the class, this will be the second year to do it. That's in November, I think, LACP game. Yeah. That all started with this idea of developing personal projects and you know, the pitfalls and the triumphs and everything in between, and you know, learning the difference between quitting and stopping and reassessing, and you know, figuring out what the hell to do with it all once you have it, you know. And I think the one thing that about it is that, like, I'm trying to do it myself, you know. I'm right there with them, and jumping those hurdles and asking questions and trying to find things to push me a little further. So that's the workshop.
Well, I tell people that personal projects is sort of the inevitable evolution, I think, for any photographer, because at some point you exhaust what's possible with just the singular photograph.
Sure.
And at some point you're going to have to ask yourself, okay, now I know how to make a good photograph, but now what do I want to say?
Absolutely.
And I think that a personal project is really the way to do it. And if you look in the chat there, you'll find details on that, on the class. So
Oh yeah, I saw that.
heartily recommend it.
Thank you.
But thank you again, and thank you, LACP. So,
My pleasure. Thank you guys. Thanks for hanging in there. So I think just about everybody was still in that signed in. So that's great. Thank you. Awesome.
Thanks so much for being here, everybody. Does anybody have any further questions? If you do, just feel free to unmute yourself and just ask them real quick before we run out of time. We still got about 9 minutes before we're actually done. If anybody has any further questions.
I just want to say thank you so much, Brandon. It's so nice to have you. Your work is fantastic.
Thank you, man. Absolutely. Yeah, I wish COVID wasn't happening. I'd love to see y'all in person.
I wish so too. Oh, soon, I hope.
Absolutely. Any other questions?
getting a lot of thank yous in the chat. So.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, lots of things. I just see them popping up. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Man. This was such a treat. I appreciate it. This is the first time I think I've spoken in several months. So,
and people can, we should mention people can order your book off of your site, right?
yeah. Let me, I can just copy it into the thing if you like. But, chat. I don't know how to, yeah. Okay, yeah, there's the link. Will you be making another book with the portraits you showed us here tonight? Yvette, I don't know. I don't know if it's a time and place for it. I think it might be a time for other people to be making books on this. I'm not sure. I'd love to at some point, but somebody else asked, what have I been doing aside from this recently? I can just show you, I'm really excited about, I started this body of work real briefly. I got, I think, like 6 pictures in here. Going back to my home region in southern Louisiana, closer to my home, and photographing the Acadian tail Longfellow called Evangeline, and this sort of wandering soul looking for a lost love in the moody swamps. So stuff like
Beautiful.
this, which is a real joy. Is that there's a difference between making and taking photographs, I feel like, nowadays for me. And it's literally 1 week's worth of shooting, but I'm really excited for the exercise of exploring my imagination and creating something. I've never used a model like that, and it's fun.
I feel like you walk between the whole fine art world and the photojournalistic world like so eloquently. You walk over and you do this really well, and then you walk over and do this really well, and that's not usually the case. You know, usually somebody's one or the other really, really good. I mean, people can do both, but usually one person's better than the other. I think you're equally as good at one of the as the other. I just want to
That means so much. Thank you. Thank you.
thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tightrope. Awesome. No, thanks, Sophie. Cool. Oh, do you ever think of using text with your images? Not on top, Sabina, not on top of the images, I don't think. But it's something I've been tinkering with, and the reason why I've kept the actual website provider I have, because it's real easy for me to add text pages into my website, much like my books. The books have all these anecdotes written into them that I've mentioned tonight, and then some. So yeah, it's like an integral part of my process to have words with images. Yeah. And that's the thing about making a book too, right? As that was the big question early on, was how much, how tight do you hold the hand of the viewer? Are you explicit in telling them exactly what you want them to think? Or do you allow the images to breathe and speak at their own rhythm and meaning? And so the balance was trying to find that balance, really. I love using text. Keith used to have a quote above the entrance of the school darkroom by Ellen Gilchrist that said, "We live at the level of our language. What we can articulate, we can imagine, we can explore, we can understand." Which I thought was just perfect.
Keith is always good for a quote.
Yeah, no doubt. And a big old smile. Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. That was great
Thanks,
fun.
everybody. I appreciate it. Thanks for hanging in there with me.
Thank you so much. It's awesome.
Thank
That's
you.
great. Thank you.
Awesome.
Right. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Mhm.
All right. Thanks again, everybody.